2.5 years ago, a Vancouver mother named Tiffany Hill was killed by her estranged husband in the parking lot of her kids' elementary school.
She was given a no-contact order. For 64 days in a row, he violated that.
So Washington passed a law that lets courts put GPS ankle monitors on those accused of domestic violence.
It can be a life or death situation, and it may be the difference in giving them the time that they need to get support, get resources, get into shelter.
But we discovered many counties aren't even using these tracking devices. The biggest reason? Cost. Here's the story. And welcome to The Story. I'm Ashley Korslund. Pat has the night off. All the ways to communicate with us are at the bottom of your screen. You can send an email to thestory@kgw.com. Use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter or leave us a voicemail. Just call our number 503-226-5090. So 2 years ago this month, Washington Governor Jay Inslee signed the Tiffany Hill Act into law, a big step toward helping victims of domestic violence. It was spurred by the murder of a Vancouver mother. The law allows for courts to order accused abusers to wear GPS ankle devices that can be monitored by officials and then linked to an app on the victim's phone. They would get an alert when an offender is near them. So here we are, 2 years later. We wanted to look into whether the law is actually helping victims in the state and whether courts are ordering the monitoring in domestic violence cases. And the answers we got were not all that impressive. But before we dive into that, let's recap what got us to that point. So how did we get here? Tiffany Ojeda Hill was a Marine and a mom to 3 kids. In September 2019, police arrested her husband, Keeland Hill, after he pushed her into a wall and tried to keep her from calling 911. The next day, he was released from jail and told not to contact Tiffany. Keeland violated the no-contact order several times in the months after his arrest.
She was given a no-contact order. For 64 days in a row, he violated that.
He also tried to buy a gun, but failed the background check because of the domestic violence case. In November of 2019, detectives found a GPS tracker on Tiffany's car. Officers arrested Keeland Hill again, and investigators determined that Tiffany was in extreme danger.
The state believes that if the defendant is released, he will kill the victim.
Prosecutors asked that Keeland Hill's bail be set at $2 million because of that danger, but a judge set it at just $250,000. Keeland bailed out of jail on November 21st and murdered Tiffany 5 days later. Tiffany was shot in front of her 3 children and her mother in the parking lot of Sarah J. Anderson Elementary, where Tiffany's kids went to school.
I tried to save my baby. I came home here to break a home with me and the kids. I knew something was wrong and going on.
Keeland Hill led deputies on a chase and then killed himself. In 2020, Washington Governor Jay Inslee signed an Offender Alert Act into law, named after Tiffany Hill,
who did everything possible to protect herself. This tool wasn't available, but it might have saved her life.
It allows judges to order accused abusers to wear GPS ankle devices that can be monitored by officials and linked to an app on the victim's phone.
You can actually look at GPS coordinates and points on a map to find out where an offender is located.
And that's how we got here. Okay, so clearly the Tiffany Hill Act is an important piece of legislation, and the technology could mean the difference between life or death for some victims. Tiffany's loved ones say technology like that could have saved her had it been available to her. And many other advocates who helped victims of domestic violence feel the same way. Now, oftentimes when a law like this is passed, we see a lot of fanfare and media coverage. Here at KGW, we must have done at least a half dozen stories about it. But what happens after the cameras stop rolling and the politicians go back to their offices and stop talking about this new legislation? What actually becomes of the implementation portion of a new law? And who does the follow-up? Well, that's what we wanted to find out. So last November, I reached out to all 39 counties in Washington. I emailed or called prosecuting attorneys or court administration offices. And my question was simple. How many times has your county ordered these tracking devices permitted by the Tiffany Hill Act? Frankly, I didn't know what kind of response I would get, if any at all. But in the end, I heard back from a little less than half. We made a map to show you. The question marks are the counties that did not respond. I'm looking at you, King County and Spokane County, who, by the way, I contacted nearly a dozen times with no answer. But of those who did respond to me, almost none of them are utilizing this law. The exception is Clark County, which has more than a dozen offenders being monitored. And that makes total sense because the law originated out of Clark County, where Tiffany Hill lived. I asked the rest of the counties around the state why they are not ordering this monitoring. And well, their answers varied, but cost was the biggest barrier. So the way it works is that the offender in a domestic violence case has to foot the bill for this monitoring, which can cost up to $20 a day. So many courts are apprehensive to order it if a defendant can't afford it. Another reason, some courts cite lack of access to vendors, especially in more rural parts of the state. We checked, though, there are 5 approved vendors, and they say they do cover the whole state, so that should not be a barrier. A couple more responses we got. Some jurisdictions say were just simply not aware the law was even passed in the first place. With the pandemic, many training seminars meant to educate courts and judges on new legislation, well, they were put on hold. And then lastly, some prosecutors told me that they would like to see this technology being issued, but judges just will not order it. All right, so fast forward to this month, almost 6 months since I first started working on this investigation. I reached back out to a bunch of those prosecutors and court administrators to see if they had since learned of any new cases using the Tiffany Hill Act. And still, the answer is no. None of them are. One county said it hopes to soon, but that's about it. So really, all of this sounds like a lot of government inefficiency, a major slowdown in the process of implementing an important new law. So either it's a lack of education or access in providing critical protection to victims. And this is all at a time when domestic violence advocates say they are seeing more people seeking help from abusive situations.
In some places we're seeing, data looks like it's going down because people haven't been able to access services. They haven't been reporting, they haven't been calling for help. And in other communities, we're seeing numbers way, way up. I don't have the numbers to say for sure. What I hear from programs, what I hear anecdotally from programs throughout our state is that the levels of violence that folks experience are increasing, due to a number of factors, stressors in the home, economic instability, crises like this just kind of create a perfect storm for violence to escalate.
That is Elizabeth Montoya with the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I asked Elizabeth her thoughts on the lack of awareness and the lack of follow through when it comes to putting this law into practice.
So what I would say is, it doesn't surprise me that it has not been implemented, but only because we know that we know and we have seen that it is a struggle to get these things implemented. And so that's something that, we're always kind of thinking about as these kinds of laws move through the legislature. There are so many really important and really good ideas out there to address domestic violence and to respond to it effectively, but we also really have to think about what is implementation going to look like, and are communities going to implement it, have the capacity and willingness to follow through.
Exactly. So let's talk about the follow through. That's where Republican State Senator Linda Wilson comes in. She's from Southwest Washington and originally sponsored the Tiffany Hill Act, as she does a lot of work with domestic violence causes. Last fall, I told her how almost no counties are taking advantage of the law. Now, she could have blown us off or said, "Not my problem." But instead, she did something about it. In the last few months, she went back to the legislature and got almost $2 million from the state's $15 billion budget surplus allocated to helping Washington counties order this GPS monitoring. This money would essentially help offset the cost in cases where an offender can't afford it themselves. That means cost, in theory, should not be an issue anymore.
Why did you go ahead and seek this funding in the first place this year?
Because it's always been on my mind. It was always part of the bill, and it was always an important part. I don't want money to interfere, be a reason why someone is not able to get to the monitoring. We know that in this case, because of Tiffany Hill, we know that we feel quite confident that she would have lived if she had this. And I hear from women all the time, and I know how important this is, and so I don't want money to get in the way. So I just continued to ask for it, and we had a healthy budget this year, so we were able to do it.
And as someone who really passionately pushed for this law, is that frustrating to you that there is a lot of red tape and there seems to be a breakdown in possibly communication between the court system in the state and prosecutors and courts around the state of Washington? Would you like to see that work more effectively?
Absolutely, because we know how important that this particular type of technology is, right? And how it helps women and, gives them a little more peace of mind and protects them and their families. So yes, it does frustrate me. I see this happening all the time. I'm very thankful that Clark County was the first to implement it, because they're actually they're doing such a great job with it that other counties can learn from that. And so I would like to figure out a way to get that information out there. I know that the monitoring company I talked to yesterday said that King County just last week came on board with the victim notification monitoring. So King County is a very large jurisdiction, right? So I'm hoping that when they start using it, maybe others, through just discussions with other, judges and prosecutors, that they'll start talking about it.
All right, so some good news there. Now, there is still legwork, though, that needs to be done before counties can get access to that money. Senator Wilson says the administration of courts plans to have a meeting in May to figure out how the money will be dispersed. But hey, it's a start. We will, of course, be following this story to make sure there is follow through.